Welcome back to another episode of Rio's Life.
You're fucking weird.
What?
Like, really strangely weird.
Your face got something on it. Is that makeup? Caked up makeup? Welcome back to another episode of Rio's Life. Today, my wife will be joining us to talk about how we built our tiny house.
Hi, I'm Lynn Calloway. As Mario mentioned, I'm his wife. You guys have probably seen me on other videos. We're really excited about today's video because we've gotten so many questions. I mean, we've had questions from how we built it to how much things cost. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down 9 things to consider before you even break ground to build your tiny home. So we're going to be sharing a bunch of gems in this video. Sit tight, watch it to the end. You don't want to miss it.
Number one on our list of things to consider when building a tiny house is the
budget. It's probably the most important thing starting out because you can't build anything if you don't know how much money you have to allocate towards said project. So the budget was really, really important for us. We wanted to stay, if possible, below the budget. We came in slightly above it, but our budget was
$50,000 originally.
Yeah. But we came in at, no.
50 was the budget, but we came in at 45.
So we came in below the budget, sorry. So budget is very important. And also just keeping track of things, because that's how you can really blow your budget into pieces by not knowing where money is going. And things add up really quickly. I mean, from material to paying your contractors, before you know it, if you're not keeping contact, of everything, you can spend money quickly. Budget was really, really important. I definitely highly recommend that you use your handy Excel sheet or Google sheet. If you're not familiar with those things, definitely Google it. Do whatever you need to do, but that was a good way for us to keep tally of things that we were spending by just like itemizing it. And then when there were new equipment or new things that we needed to pay for, we just added that to the sheet along with how much those things cost. So that kept us really, really organized in the beginning. So yeah, budget is pretty important.
And a good rule of thumb anytime you're establishing a budget for any project is to account for any overage that you may not be thinking of when you initially plan out how much you want to spend. So for us, it was essentially an additional 10% buffer on top of the amount we wanted to spend, just to make sure at the last minute if things went awry or something wasn't in stock, we could pivot and buy another item to replace it and not blow the budget up. Number 2 on our list of things to consider when building a tiny house is the
location. Location is really important for a few reasons. Obviously, it really depends on where you guys are starting. Like if you're looking for a piece of property for the sole purpose of building a tiny house or multiple tiny homes, obviously you want to make sure that the property is in an area where people might want to visit or might want to come to, especially if you are targeting it towards single, midterm, or even long-term renting. That is early on in your search, right? For us, we already had our home, and it is in a big city, Austin, Texas. So it is one of those places where people kind of flock to throughout the year. So we were lucky in that regards. But the other part to why location is important is around zoning. You want to make sure that your area is zoned to allow for ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units, aka tiny homes. Make sure that they are appropriate, that your property is appropriate to have those structures there. And then obviously there's ordinances and all those things that we'll get into a little bit later. So yeah, location is really important for those 2 reasons: your property being marketable, and also for zoning purposes. Which brings us to our third point, permits.
So anytime you want to build a structure in a city, you have to make sure the proper building permits first. That's just sort of table stakes. And once you have your building permit sorted out, the city will typically come out, have a look at the structure to make sure all the electrical and the plumbing and all that stuff is sorted out and that the area is actually habitable for someone to actually rent. And so once that's sorted out, you essentially have to decide if you want to do short-term rentals or long-term rentals. So if you do decide that you want to go the short-term rental route, here in Austin, there's a separate process, which involves you having to go in and talk to the city. At that point, they're going to come out to make sure that you're able to do a short-term rental based on the zoning, which Lynn mentioned earlier. And then from there, you're essentially paying a registration fee. Now, once all of that is sorted out, you're now able to legally rent out your space in a short-term capacity.
And you don't have to rent it, you don't have to target short-term, long-term, medium-term Airbnb. Well, we've had a bunch of people comment and want to know more about tiny house living or tiny home living who are building their tiny homes for the sole purpose of living in. So if you don't need to go that route in terms of renting it out, and you're just really looking for the purpose of living in it, then you don't need to reach out for the STR license or anything like that.
Now, I think it is important to do just in case, because the permitting process can take some time. So if you decide early on, hey, I'm not going to do short-term rentals, and maybe a couple months later you decide you want to, depending on where you live, it might be a lengthy process, and you'll be kicking yourself if you didn't do it earlier. So if there's any possibility that at some point in the future you may want to do short-term rentals, I think it's pretty sound advice to go ahead and just get it done from the beginning. And then if you decide, as Lynn mentioned, on in the future that you don't want to do short-term rentals, now you have the flexibility to go back and forth because you've already handled the process. Number 4 on our list of things to consider when building a tiny home is your design and your layout. So for us, we thought it was really important that we wanted to build a large tiny house. I know it sounds weird, a large tiny house, right? But we wanted to really maximize the space and have whoever that ended up in it feel as though it's going to be comfortable, have everything they needed. But Lynn actually did most of the design and layout, so I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, so like in the beginning, before we even broke ground and before our contractor came out to help us build it, I essentially had a really rough, and I mean rough, sketch of what I wanted it to look like. The structure itself is what they call a lean-to, where the roof is sloped. So we knew it was going to be that way from the beginning, for a few reasons. It just allows for runoff of water. If you want to do a water catchment system, things like that, you're able to catch water a little bit better. A few different reasons to go with the lean-to structure, and also just looks cool to me. But just where the windows are placed, the door, we're going to have a back door, where the back window is going to be placed. We have a very long, picturesque type of, I think the word is actually picture window. I said picturesque, but I mean, it does look kind of picturesque when you're looking out of the window. But this long, elongated picture window, and so we needed to work that window in with like where the loft was going to be. So there's a ton of things to take into consideration. Where's the bathroom going to be? Where's the water heater going to be stored? There's so many different elements to the layout and understanding how it's going to work for you and your family, that you don't have to be an artist to have a really rough sketch of whatever it is that you want to build. For me, I used the sketch pad on my iPad to really sketch out the tiny home and just kind of how we wanted to lay it out. Whatever works for you, pen and paper will also work just fine, just as long as you're able to communicate with your contractor or whoever it is that's building the structure on like how you want everything to be laid out. So design and layout is definitely important to consider when building a tiny home. The 5th thing to consider when building your tiny home is plumbing.
Yeah, plumbing is something we knew early on we were not gonna even attempt to do, just because like neither one of us are plumbers, and if you get your plumbing wrong, it can cost you a lot of money down the road and oftentimes be a mess to clean up. So we knew we were gonna have a contractor handle that early on, so we did our research. We found a crew that had a lot of skill at doing this thing here, and so we brought them on down to the site. We told them our plan. They had our existing plumbing and all of that and figured out a path to get the plumbing back out to the street. And then so from there, once they knew how they wanted to build it, they essentially got started. And so we have to figure out where all the connections are going to come from in a tiny house that needed water outlets and where the outflow of waste from the toilet would actually go. But luckily, since we already had a design layout, we already knew where everything was going to be in terms of water connections. And they essentially built off of that layout to actually bring about our plumbing system.
Number 6 on our list is electrical. This is something else you do not want to play with. You want to get the professionals. You want to get folks that know what they're doing, that are certified in electrical work. So yeah, we knew we weren't going to be getting behind the walls and electrical boxes and cutting wire. Like, I wouldn't know where to start with that. Mario don't know where to start with that. So that's something that we knew for sure we did not want to have a hand on. But you know, you do want to be able to communicate with your electrician on where things are going to be in terms of your appliances and things like that, so that they know essentially what they're doing. And then going back to permits, which we discussed earlier, that's definitely something that needs to have all the checks and balances between, you know, your electrical engineer and all that stuff, in terms of it being wired correctly, because you don't want your structure to catch on fire. So yeah, electrical is definitely something to consider when building your tiny home.
So number 7 on our things to consider when building a tiny home is labor. So early on, you have to figure out who's going to do what, and then you want to assess your current skills as well, right? You want to make sure if it's something that you can do, you don't pay someone to do that. You just find the time to do it or watch a couple YouTube videos and go from there. But there will always be a list of things that you don't have very much skill in, or maybe are too tedious and you just don't want to deal with it. But early on, when you're planning things out, figure out what you can do and what you don't want to do, and then that goes back into budget to figure out how much you're going to be able to afford to pay these additional people.
And just to kind of piggyback on what Mario mentioned in terms of labor, like, you want to do your due diligence when you're looking for these contractors. For us, we leverage platforms like Nextdoor. We're part of a network of other real estate investors here in Austin, where like we kind of, you know, if someone has used an electrician or a plumber already, then we'll like add it to like this database that we all use and just kind of communicate with each other. So that was helpful. But a lot of the contractors that we found were really just doing research and getting referrals from people, because you just don't want to be in that situation where you are allowing a contractor to come in and do like something so important like the plumbing or the electrical work, and you know, you don't know this person from the next person or from a can of paint, and so you've, you know, if given them something so important like your electrical work or your plumbing, and you know, they come in and they screw things up because you didn't do what you were supposed to do early on when it came to researching. So yeah, definitely do your due diligence when searching for contractors.
So another thing to consider here is that you should not, I'll say it again, you should not be paying your contractors more than 30% upfront to get anything done. We've heard all sorts of horror stories about folks who pay contractors up 100% before anything had been done, and then those guys just disappear with the money. So be smart about it. Obviously, you got to pay something up front. 30% is a pretty good amount to pay up front to ensure that the work is going to get done. And not only getting done, but getting done as you spec things out. You want to be satisfied with the work before you're fully paying all your contractors. And then you shouldn't have too many problems.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of some people say that they don't pay anything up front. I don't really know what kind of contractors would agree to that. I mean, we, you know, find ourselves as being fair people and not trying to take advantage of people. And we understand that they're doing a job and they have a family and people to feed that are depending on them as well. So we want to be fair in that regard. But we have heard of horror stories where people are, you know, just got essentially robbed of their money, and the contractor just didn't show up, or they got all the money up front, they started a little work, and then they didn't come back to finish like months down the road because maybe they got a bigger job or something like that. Like, I mean, you'll come across like weird stuff. So just be smart about it. The 8th thing on our list is foundation.
So I'm sure you guys have already heard it. You got to have a sound foundation before you build any house. Building a tiny house, honestly, is no different. And there are typically 2 options you're going to be picking from, either pier and beam or traditional slab setup. So here in Austin, we know that the ground shifts a lot. And you saw in the earlier video where I was fixing those little hairline cracks, That's a result of us being in a drought for the last 3 to 4 months. And when the ground is super, super dry or really, really wet, you'll have shifting. And that shifting will often create hairline cracks in your drywall, which we've actually had in our main house and in the tiny home. So our main house actually has a slab. The tiny house has pier and beam. Still had cracks I gotta fix on both structures. So
they're not like major to the point where like we have leakage.
No.
Or mildew or mold or like it's really impacting their structures. I mean, they're really small, and it's just really due to the unsettling of the ground, which doesn't happen a whole lot. Like Mario, you guys saw in the last video, he fixed those little hairline fractures of like in the drywall, and we haven't had them re-crack since. So it's just a part of the territory of living in a place where the ground shifts for no apparent reason.
Yeah, I mean, as Lynn mentioned, it's cosmetic, but we're perfectionists. We want to make sure the space looks absolutely wonderful for everyone who happens to be in there. And, you know, over time, as you see them developing, it takes about a year or two for it to get sort of noticeable. And I just go in and I patch them up, and I probably won't have to for at least 2 or 3 more years. Yeah. So the 9th thing on our list of 9 things to consider when you're building a tiny house is...
Are you renting? What are you doing? So what is the objective? Like for us, it was the peak of the pandemic, so we really needed extra space. That's really what it started out being for us with the tiny home, is that we were on top of each other. Mario was working from home. I was working from home. Our son was home. I mean, everyone lived it, so I don't have to rehash the pandemic, but that was the main reason. And then, you know, as things started to open back up and we started to talk about this space, we started to share pictures of the tiny home. We started to get so many people wanting to stay in it, wanted to live in it. I mean, we've had so many people reach out to us just by looking at some of the videos that we've posted. So just understand the objective. Like, is this a tiny home just for you and your family? If not, if it is a short-term or medium or long-term rental, there are steps that need to happen for those to be successful. So that's why we're saying, are you renting? What are you doing? What is the objective with building the tiny home? So yeah, you know, you just want to have those things really laid out before you really break ground.
And as Lynn mentioned, things change. So in addition to us needing more space, we thought, hey, if one of us comes down with COVID, we can go to the nice cushy tiny house and like quarantine ourselves from the rest of the house. And so once that had essentially run its course, what we thought about was, do we do short-term rentals, do we do long-term, which one? So what ultimately ended up happening is that the people who reached out to us dictated how the space is going to be used. More often than not, we had a ton of requests about long-term renting. And it was something we hadn't put a ton of thought into before. And we thought like, I don't know, are we going to be landlords? How does it work if you're doing a long-term renting situation? And so that is what the tiny house has been used for. And people typically stay for months at a time and they love it. But that just sort of shows you how things may change from original plans to how it's actually being used over time.
And we were already doing a short-term rental with our studio, which is really, really popular. People from all over have come, and then when they come to stay at the short-term rental, they see the tiny home in the back, and then we've had some people just inquire about staying in that one, or they'll tell a friend or whatnot. So just having that traffic from our other property is also just kind of a good way to get people to come in for us. So yeah, just understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. So there you have it, the 9 things to consider before you build your tiny home. We're so happy that you guys stuck with us throughout the entire video. We hope that you found the information useful. Like always, if there's something that you want us to talk about or to discuss, anything pertaining to our very unique, crazy lives, by all means, put it in the comments, let us know. And if there's something pertaining to the tiny home that you want us to cover in another video, we're so happy to do that. We want to be a resource to you all, especially individuals who are really interested in sustainable living and just reducing their footprint when it comes to just living their life. So, anything you want to add?
That's pretty much it. We covered it.
So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.